You think we pay enough tribute? You think we appreciate our men in blue enough? I mean, let me tell you, they're attacked every day in the press, in the community. People just don't have, it appears anyway, they don't have the trust for our beat walkers, those who are trying to protect and serve our communities, protect our property, protect us. There's a lot of crime going on right now out there. But you know what? You don't really appreciate a police officer until you need them. 9/11, good morning. It's Gary Byron, 11 minutes after 9 o'clock. Our next guest into the Daily Connerton Memorial Company interview chair has been with us a few times. He's not only a state senator, he's also a former man in blue. I believe he was in Vernon, I believe. I'll ask him when he comes on. Let's welcome back to the show State Senator Dan Champagne. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Great. How are you this morning?
I'm good.
Yeah, you was Vernon that you served with, right?
Right. I served 22 years with the Vernon Police Department.
Wow. Vernon, 22 years, long time. You and in that duration of time, think about your first few years. Think about your last few years. What were some of the greatest changes that you've seen from one direction to like the pendulum? They always say the pendulum swings. Both ways. What are some of the biggest disparities between when you first went into the police department and to your last few years?
Well, to be honest, my first couple of years, we actually used a word processor. And at the end, we used computers. And that word processor, every time you clicked your shoulder mic, it erased everything.
Oh, wow.
That was terrible.
That is.
So I'd say that's the biggest. And then when obviously you get into the actual police work too.
Yeah.
In the beginning of my career, I would find somebody that had been arrested like 15, 16 times. And I was amazed that this person was still out on the road. And then when I left, we were finding people arrested 60, 70, 80 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
For the same offense?
Different offenses all across the board. You know, somebody said it correctly yesterday, and I don't want to give you their name, but they said, in order to go to prison in Connecticut, you really have to work hard at it.
Oh, man.
And that's pretty true.
You think that's just relevant in Connecticut, or is that becoming the national narrative?
Well, you know what? I think it is starting to become across the board. Once you start doing things like, allowing people to just, get out for any reason,
mm-hmm.
It's going to spread. If you don't do the time for the crime, people know it. Well, and when you get arrested, and let me give you one example. We had a guy who was been arrested many times. I mean, one of his original cases was a bank robbery and shooting, and he just went on to commit larcenies and breaking into homes, and the judge arrests him, or I'm sorry, he's in court, gets sentenced, but he gets a 2-week to get his things in order. And during that 2 weeks, he went on this joyride from Vernon to Colchester, running over signs, mailboxes from here to Colchester. Mm. And then he smashed into the front of a package store, moving the entire building 2 inches off its base.
Oh.
He gets arrested by all the different police departments that night, and goes to court, and they just sent him to prison. Nothing happened from all that little crime wave. And, if they would have sentenced him, I think, on day one for the serious crime that he did, I think there would have been a lot less victims.
So was he released?
I don't know where he is now. I've been out of police work for 8 years.
Well, true. All right, so let's talk about these car break-ins. When you're a police officer and, number one, I guess is a twofold question. How difficult is it to actually catch somebody breaking into cars in the middle of the night? And then the other part of that question is when you see that same perpetrator out the very next day committing the very same crime, how disheartening is it for a police officer and you doing your job when you know the same pattern is just going to happen all over again?
Well, it's very frustrating. Every policeman out there, they don't like to look at what happens to their cases. Because if you look at your cases, it's very frustrating. So you just make the arrest, send the case along, up the chain and to the court, and never look at what happened.
Yeah.
Because if you did, you just get very frustrated. Even some of your bigger cases. And it's not the court's fault. I mean, you look at the courts. I mean, they're having 300 trials in the cities a day. Cases coming forward. Out in my area, it's probably 60 a day. But I mean, those are some big numbers, and so you understand what they're going through. And you look at we keep closing prisons. It isn't because crime's reducing; it's because they're just not putting people in prison. One of the debates right now is marijuana, and the fact that there's nobody locked up for simple possession of marijuana. So the new tactic is, well, those that you can violate people's parole and probation because of marijuana, so that does send them to prison. And my remark to that is that's not the original case that they're locked up for. And the same thing is true with alcohol, if they get caught with alcohol. But what they fail to tell you is they're not really locking people up for either of those right now. Parole violations and probation violations aren't the biggest people going back into prison. So, yeah, COVID, we released a lot of people from prison. So right now, we have some pretty bad people out there, and our courts aren't moving as fast as they normally would because of COVID. It's a mess. We got a lot of stolen cars, a lot of car break-ins, and to find people for a car break-in, you got to understand, you're in a police car, you're driving down a road, you're shining your light, and basically they can just duck. So it's actually the people that have the break-ins that are calling us, and then basically looking out the window, keeping an eye on the people.
Who is letting these people out specifically? I want to know who are letting these hardened criminals out of jail and letting them roam free in our neighborhoods?
Well, I wish I could give you that answer. Somewhere along the court, not the court system, somewhere in the corrections, the decision was made to release a lot of people due to COVID. And I'm being told from my police sources that many of them have been rearrested already. So
it's the corrections department then that's allowing that has the purview to allow this.
Yeah, well, I think it comes higher than that. Somebody's giving the order to release them, and I'm not quite sure who's actually at the top of that, giving that order out.
Wow, that is a tough pill to swallow. Why bother being a police officer? It's just cat and mouse. You catch them, and then you got to catch them again tomorrow, and you got to catch them the next day, and they keep getting released. It's all the paperwork, all the work of that you're doing daily. Is really becoming for naught. Actually becomes kind of a funny game to the criminal.
Yeah. You know what? I mean, we really, I'm listening to what's happening, with everybody coming down on the police, especially here in Connecticut.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of the laws be presented this year, and the question is, why are you just picking police out on this? Why isn't this a more generalized thing? Yesterday during, one of the hearings, I asked because they brought up the point, well, police use their unions to get out of trouble. And I said, well, that's all unions. Unions are there to protect the employees within that union. Mm-hmm. What makes police different? But it's like, well, I'm going to target police on this. They want to do a statewide social media policy for police. And I said, well, why isn't this a policy for everybody? Why are you pointing police again?
Yeah.
And this is a question that's been asked numerous times on several bills this year. And, there is no answer to that. Well, we'll start with police. Well, if you look at nationally, the police have been targeted. And I think one of the things you said, with police being out there, I think, the media is the one going after police. And it's the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is going after our police.
Why? What is it about police that the Democrat Party doesn't?
Well, you know what? Every time they attach to something, they're looking for votes, and that's kind of the way I feel. But they're demonizing. They're judging all police by the actions of a few, and you can't do that. There are a lot of hardworking people out there that the last thing an officer wants to do, number one, is to hurt anybody, and number two is to get into a shootout. That's not something you go to work saying that's what I want to do.
Sure.
Now, I remember an incident where the closest I ever came to having to shoot somebody was a suspect that had kidnapped his wife out of Boston, ended up in Vernon. His plan was he's going to kill himself and his estranged wife. And, he made a mistake. He left her in the gas station store while he had to go out and use the payphone to correct his canceled credit card. And we got there, and I remember it because it was in slow motion. He ran to his car, jumped in, and he pulled the gun out, and the gun came up. It was aimed at my partner.
Oof.
I started to pull the trigger. He kept going and shot himself. And I remember walking away from that going, oh, thank goodness I didn't have to do it.
Wow. We're speaking with a 22-year veteran of the Vernon Police Department and present state senator Dan Champagne. Yet I find it ironic, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, that the Police Chiefs Association are, they're for legalizing recreational marijuana. They're for letting some of these criminals out. They are, they're sending a conflicting message to what you're saying about the Democrat Party. They seem to be, I guess, more or less in bed with them. They've been quoted even in the papers by saying that they're with Lamont and the Democrats all the way. So then, which is it?
Well, you know what? I can't talk for them. And, I'm looking at the marijuana, and I asked the question during some of our debates, are we doing this for the money? And the answer is no. And I said, okay, then let's take whatever money, if this gets legalized, let's take whatever money that we're going to get from marijuana and put it into rehabilitation. Let's start rehab. Get people with addiction problems. Let's make it available so that they can go get help. Make it easier, long term, a positive solution. And then we have to train our police officers because they have to get this specialized training in order to recognize those under the influence of marijuana that are driving. And I got a price quote for Vernon, and it was approximately $6,500 an officer to train them for this specialized training. This isn't cheap. If this is the direction we're going, I just want to make sure we're ready for it. And, we have legalized marijuana in Massachusetts. I'm told that many Connecticut residents go up there. Mm-hmm. It's coming. But I think we shouldn't say this. We're doing this just for the money. And if the money does come in, like I said, we should help people that have problems.
Well, yeah, but it almost sounds counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take the money, put it into rehabilitation that we're giving you permission to purchase legally for recreational purposes. I guess it's a cycle, it's a circle, and it just keeps going and going and going. Well, I guess maybe that needs to be better explained to me. We're going to help you create a vice and use money to get you from the sale of it to get you off of it. I'm left dumbfounded here.
Oh, I know, and I think the rehab has to go to alcohol and harder drugs as well. But you know what? This is a Democrat priority this year, and I can see it moving in that direction. A lot of people don't understand when we commercialized marijuana. We're not talking about the marijuana from the 60s and 70s, right. Which had a THC level of 3 to 5%. We're talking some of these commercialized products have 100% THC, and THC is basically what gets you high. And they're saying at 100%, it does have addictive qualities. So, there's a problem with this new stuff that's out there. And, that has to be recognized when we start this debate. All
right. Well, if they are stoned beyond what they were in the 60s and 70s and maybe even the 80s at 100%, then and there's no test that you as a police or a former police officer, there's no test that a police officer can perform to somebody that they pull over, unlike with alcohol where there's a breathalyzer test and there's a field sobriety test that they can perform to get a more definitive answer. From what I understand with marijuana, there's only a blood test in which the results would not be immediately available. Then how do you, if the technology, although I hear we're not far away technologically speaking, but we're not quite there yet, then how do you perform a test that can stand up in court?
Right, and that's what these field tests are for. And they're more advanced, and those are what are going to be used. And that's what I'm talking about. In order to get the officers to the drug, it's called the drug recognition officer, and in order to get them fully trained, they're very expensive.
Yeah.
So we have 2 in Vernon, and but I don't think that's enough. I think we're going to need more because we do end up with a lot of people under the influence of alcohol, and if you legalize marijuana, studies have shown that the main reason people don't use illegal drugs is because they're illegal. So when you legalize it, you're going to have a lot more use.
Yeah, well, all right. That's a great point. We're running out of time, but there's a couple other issues that I wanted to talk. I wanted to go back and revisit these kids, and I say kids, they are often kids or young adults that are just committing they're breaking into cars every night, and those that are getting caught are back out there the very next night. I mean, there's got to be something that can be done, to at least combat this a little. But it just seems to be getting worse, not even slightly better.
Right. This goes back to the changes in the law that have been made over the past 10 years. And one of those is where we took the 16 and 17-year-olds, and instead of them being, charged as the adults for these crimes, they're being charged as juveniles. And as a juvenile, there's not a whole heck of a lot that happens. So, that's just one of the laws. So you got to look back at all the laws that have been put in place and figure out, okay, what can we change to get this under control again? Because as long as we can't control what happened or the consequences, and we're not actually giving out consequences, we're going to be in the same boat for a while.
Do you see the state of policing changing at all? We've been hearing the calls from communities, community after community on a national, level, saying, policy's got to change. There's got to be less and less. I don't want to use the word brutality, but less. I guess physical contact. But I guess I, as a person who's never walked in your shoes or any police officer's shoes for that matter, what is the solution?
Well, the problem is, when I first started as a police officer, you'd tell somebody, all right, stay there, let's get this figured out. Now they don't listen. And a lot of times, I remember this one domestic, the woman, and this is just an example, but the woman had been beat up. And so I'm placing the gentleman under arrest, and she hits me with a chair. At that point, all of a sudden, we're fighting both of them. What happens in law enforcement is things explode almost instantly. Yeah. And a lot of times the fight is on, and you're fighting for your survival to get the suspect under control. And again, you're not doing this to hurt people. You're doing this to make the arrest and make sure you're protecting yourself and anybody else around, including the suspect.
Yeah, I find it ironic that she was the one that called you, and there you were there to protect her. And just how funny. It's sad that, domestics can escalate out of control at the blink of an eye. Listen, I'm running out of time, or just about run out of time. I love having you on. I'd love to continue this conversation again. Again, a former 22-year veteran of the Vernon Police Department, as well as present-day State Senator Dan Champagne. Thank you for your time with us this morning.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Dan. We're going to come right back to your phone calls. Lots to discuss this morning, particularly that issue. Start calling now. Phone lines are open.
Chris Foster. The Democrats' coronavirus stimulus bill is expected to pass today without any support from House